So I'm happy to welcome you to the session with Maria Van Vallis, Nurturing and Assessing Quality Geographic Thinking. It's great to see people from all over Ontario participating in this session, and I know that you're in for an awesome session with Maria. So Maria, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mally. So my name is Maria Van Vallis, and I know that some of you have been in some sessions before, including the Summer Institute, so it's really nice to see some of your names here again. I have been teaching for over 16 years, and I have been teaching intermediate geography for a number of years. But I've also been working with the Critical Thinking Consortium for about 4 years now, and I've been using the Critical Thinking Framework in my classroom prior to that, and I'm very passionate about it, and I'm very happy to be here talking to you about the ways in which framing our classrooms, our geography classroom in this instance, through the lens of critical inquiry and really understanding and developing a common framework for critical thinking can really take the engagement to the next level. And this is part of the series. This is the second part, but it's okay if you weren't at the first. I'm going to review a few things just to move us forward. But the real core of this, from my perspective, getting students to think both geographically and historically, is all in the service of citizenship. So as teachers, we really have made two covenants, I think, in our work. The first covenant that we've made is to help bring out and lead out the gifts that are inherent in our students. And the second is that we are nurturing citizens. So with that frame in mind, I really want to explore the concept of geographic thinking together tonight. So I'm really happy to have you here to do that with me. I did want to let you know up front, because some people do like to tweet during sessions. That is my Twitter handle. Also, the Critical Thinking Consortium's Twitter handle at the bottom. Our website, which I will refer you to a little bit later, and also my email address. And I will put this up later as well. And if you ever have any questions, I'm really happy to answer questions for you. So I wanted to start off just with your questions about nurturing and assessing geographic thinking in students. So you can type your questions right directly onto the slide itself using the tool, or if you're more comfortable, you can put your questions into the chat box. There aren't too many of us tonight. Oh, our group has grown a bit, but we're still a pretty manageable group. Okay, so sorry, there's some background noise. Not sure if that's on my end or Mally's end. We'll try to deal with that. Having trouble with provocations? Other questions that you might have about nurturing and assessing geographic thinking? Or even what you are, hoping to gain from the session tonight, just to make sure that I address, really try to address some of your concerns. What is the most important thing to do to nurture this thinking? Great question. And I really hope I give you some ideas or spark some ideas. Any other questions? What's the first priority in making an assessment plan? What's the definition of geographic thinking? Assessing inquiry-based projects? Okay, great. These are some really excellent questions. How to build students' capacity to ask the deeper questions. Thinking critically, focus on inquiry, but how do you manage projects and assess? Really, really important questions that we're contending with in inquiry-based classrooms, right? It's that shift from Not that the content isn't important, but really what we're trying to do is help students think through the content. Okay, so what I want to focus on, and again, for some of you who were in the previous session, I want to do just a little review just so we're all on the same page. And I want to spend the first half of the session really focusing on the ways in which we can frame the geographic content to really nurture the kind of the deeper thinking, the quality thinking, thinking that's critical and creative and collaborative. Okay, I just want to make sure I get these questions. The first session we talked about having students develop a message to the world and then determine the difference between evidence and conclusions, what comes next, how to implement an inquiry-based project and assessment. The inquiry takes so long that I struggle to incorporate all of the curriculum. Yeah, and I think one thing I did want to say about this is I do think that as teachers, you know, we are having to make critically thoughtful decisions. And we need to, yes, we absolutely want to ensure that we focus on the overall expectations and bring students or nurture the kind of thinking that allows students to work through the geographic content and the specific expectations. But we also don't want to just be accountants of expectations, because I don't think that's really very meaningful for us and certainly doesn't allow us to really develop the kind of thinking that we want. So we are going to have to make choices in how we frame our problem. So I hope our program, and I hope tonight that you'll get some ideas and some frameworks for how we might do this, right? And getting students to buy in, absolutely. They don't always see the importance of what they are learning. So our question tonight is, how do we nurture and assess quality geographic thinking in students that leads to active citizenship? Again, this is part of our trying to create that world-changing classroom. And some of the young people here I find quite inspiring to bring into our classroom because these young people, when they've started a lot of their journey on being active citizens who do think like geographers in different ways, as well as scientists and ecologists and that sort of interdisciplinary thinking. They started at about 13, 14, you know, that intermediate age that is sort of the focus of our session. Alex Lurtz, he's developed a whole youth movement, an I Matter movement with an app that is trying to really engage youth around the world, but he's quite focused in the United States. And you might have heard about this group because they've been in the news recently. They have won the right to sue the United States government over inaction on climate change. So really interesting to look at these young people really, really engaged in environmental issues. Charmaine Moyo, a young woman in Zimbabwe who was really concerned about the fact that there were no recycling facilities in Zimbabwe. And she actually helped to start her community develop a whole recycling program. Takea Blaney, First Nations from the West Coast, who is a beautiful singer and an ambassador for particularly water, issues around water around the world. And Boyan Slat, who's the Dutch innovator, who at 14 years old started thinking about the ways that he could clean the oceans of plastic. He was so concerned about this issue. And this year they'll be launching part of his design off the coast of Japan. And they've raised $1 million for that innovation. So here are young people who have clearly, you know, they are thinking as global citizens. They're thinking in different ways geographically. And how do we nurture that? So getting at that issue of engagement that's come up for people. Right in the front matter of the revised curriculum is this circle, and it is the Citizenship Framework. And really as teachers, this Citizenship Framework is to inform our work in social studies, in history and geography. Now we can't focus on every single one of these in one course or in one unit, But we certainly can look at this and decide, you know, here are some of the elements of the Citizenship Education Framework. And we can maybe pick 3 or 4 that we really want to focus on in a particular unit or in our particular class, and make sure that we're framing some of our tasks and activities that are allowing students to develop and nurture these qualities of citizenship and active citizenship. Okay, so again, we're going to look at some ways that we can do that. But I want you to take a moment just to think about for yourself right now. I'm going to ask you to just pick 3 of these characteristics from the Citizenship Education Framework that you would want to focus on. Think about your particular class, your particular context, things where you feel you have a contribution to make as a teacher, and which 3 dimensions of this framework would you like to focus on? So I'm going to give you just a moment to think that through. And I encourage you to create a thought space for yourself tonight where you might jot down some of the different ideas and answers to the question of how we might nurture the quality geographic thinking that will lead to active citizenship. And I think I do have to say that given the different events of our world today, in so many ways, it has never been more important for us as teachers to really put the nurturing of robust, critical thinkers, you know, at the top of our list of our priorities in terms of what we're doing and our contribution to society. Okay. I'm hoping everyone's had a chance to maybe think of the 3 that they'd like to focus on. So the first part, as I mentioned tonight, you know, we've got our overall question of nurturing and assessing quality geographic thinking. But I want us to look at how could we effectively design our tasks to engage students in opportunities to think like a geographer. And we are going to explore what exactly that means, to think the way a geographer thinks. I wanted to point out, by the way, that the backdrop for this slide, it comes from the actual thought book of a wonderful naturalist and explorer, Alexander von Humboldt. And a book was written about him, The Invention of Nature, last year by Andrew Wolfe. And this is just something for you as a teacher of geography and also the beautiful connections with science and ecology. This is a really wonderful book about a very, very interesting man who actually was one of the first people who began to understand the differences in climate zones. And at the time that he was writing, at the turn of the Industrial Revolution, he actually predicted climate change. So it's quite fascinating to read about him today. So I just wanted to mention it in case you haven't come across it, because it is a wonderful book. But this idea of having a thought space where students are working with an overall meaningful question that they come back to and are able to revisit is something I want us to look at tonight. So I wanted to ask you, looking at these 2 graphs, if you were planning a trip to the mystery location here, I want to ask you, when would you visit? Right? When would you visit? And feel free to tap your answer into the chat box. You know, which month would you want to plan your trip? Okay. And if you tell us your month, just give a little reason as to why. Why would you want to plan your trip at that time? Okay, so in April, because there's little rain and it's not too hot. April for the same reasons. September, love the rain, beautiful, and warmer temperatures. You lived in Bangkok. Oh, that's fascinating. For 4 years. May, warm but not extreme temperature, moderate precipitation. Great. Well, thank you for sharing those answers, and feel free to continue. So I want us thinking about the task we've just engaged in, and just the move that I made. I have not told you where this is, and I'm asking you essentially to decode this data and provide some rationale and some evidence. So thinking about when we work with our students, what are some of the ways that we can tweak our tasks to invite some deeper thinking? And I'm going to ask you to do that again here, where I want to invite you to construct a powerful caption for this image. Okay, so take a moment to think about it and construct a powerful caption for the image. Danger in numbers. Thank you, Ida. The Great Escape. What will become of them? We're all sharing the same boat, so we must learn to work together. Searching for higher ground. Thank you so much for your thoughtful answers. So again, wanting to think about how we can bring in images. So someone was talking about provocations earlier, and how images can be such powerful entry points for the curriculum. So thinking about the grade 8 geography curriculum, human geography, issues of human settlement in relation to the environment, how we can start with an image and really invite all students in, creating a powerful entry point for the learning. So what we have just done in those two examples I've given you, both decoding the data of the graphs as well as creating this powerful caption, is we have engaged in a critical thinking task. And there are many definitions, important definitions of critical thinking, and certainly at the consortium, we're not saying we have the definition of critical thinking, but I do think that over the 3 decades that we've been working together with academics and teachers and principals and members of the school system to really try to make this explicit, I do think that we have come up with a very pedagogically useful definition of critical thinking. So the definition we're working with is that when we're thinking critically, we're thinking through a problematic situation about what to believe or how to act, where the thinker has to make a reasoned judgment that reflects the competent use of the intellectual tools for quality thinking. So what you needed to do was implicit when you were reading the data is you had to make a sound judgment about, what would be the best time. So we were defining best in different ways of, the most reasonable weather that would be enjoyable. And the powerful caption, there you're invited based on what you're seeing to make that reasoned judgment. Now these intellectual tools, I want to say, we're going to talk about those intellectual tools, but it's these tools that can form a powerful lens for both instruction and assessment. So when we're trying to create a thinking classroom, I want you to pay attention for a moment to the 5 tools across the bottom of this slide. So when we're thinking critically, we are drawing on our background knowledge. So the more we know. So for example, think about some of our students who might struggle to even read a graph or know how to begin to read a graph. There might be an issue with their background knowledge that might prevent them from engaging in the challenge. So we might need to intervene in that. We need some criteria for judgment. So I asked you to create a powerful caption for the image. It's the criteria that actually creates the constraint that forces a reasoned judgment. The thinking vocabulary, so words like evidence, conclusion, justify. A thinking strategy, so a way we're going to think through a challenge. And then the habits of mind of good thinkers. So are we open-minded? Do we pay attention to detail? Are we able to persevere through a challenge? Are we able to consider multiple perspectives? Are we empathetic? So all of these things, these 5 intellectual tools, are really what's at play whenever we are thinking critically. So when we want to create a thinking geography classroom, we want to create a climate that really nurtures thinking, that creates opportunities for thinking, where we are explicitly building students' capacity to think by focusing on these intellectual tools, and where our guidance, the kind of assessment feedback we're giving, is in fact nurturing these tools. I want us to take a look for a moment just at the 3 different types of questions here, and just to take a moment and differentiate between the types of questions. So what are the key differences that you see between, so type 2, Ida's saying, is more opinion-based. The first type is factual. Okay, type 3 involving critical thinking. So in the type 1 questions, we can see that I affectionately call these Where's Waldo questions, because an answer exists. It's just a matter of retrieving that answer or knowing that answer. It is a right or wrong. Okay? With the type 2, it is a personal preference. There is no right or wrong. But the type 3 involves some investigation, some curiosity. There could be more, there's more than one right answer. It doesn't mean that every answer is a good answer, but there's more than one right answer. And it needs to be supported with some evidence, right? There's some inquiry that needs to happen in order to be able to engage in that type 3 question. Now, type 1 and 2 aren't bad questions, so I just want to put that out there. They're not, it's just important, I think, for us to get clear on what the differences are between the questions that we ask. Because if we want to invite and nurture critical thinking, we need to make sure that the tasks that we're framing are tasks that actually will involve students engaging in that kind of thinking, right? So students need to really have an understanding, for example, design an effective campaign to raise awareness about the 3 most significant impacts of deforestation. Now we have to unpack a little bit what is an effective campaign. So we're going to have to spend some time on understanding that, and then students will be able to decide. So for example, if we use sustainable as a criteria in our class, maybe what we're looking at is a sustainable response one that is effective, meaning it gets at root causes? Is it realistic? Is it something that can actually happen? And is it fair? Does it ensure that one group isn't made to have an impact more than another group in an unfair way? Those are some potential sub-criteria, right, that we can then use when we're making our decision. And Newman said in some of the research that he's done, it's the intellectual demands embedded in classroom tasks, not just a teaching strategy or technique, that influence the degree of student engagement and learning. So how are we intellectually engaging students in the tasks we're inviting them into? And I want us to take a moment right now, just so we leave here with I want people to leave here with a good understanding of a critical thinking question, so that you feel confident that you can look at a textbook question, or let's say there is an image that you find in the newspaper, that you can very confidently leave here with a sense of the 6 different ways that you can frame a critical thinking question. Okay, so we're going to look at the 6 different prompts together. So what I've got is a little task for us where I have 3 different questions here. 2 of them are examples of a critical challenge known as critique the piece. I have the definition here, and I want you to think about which example does not belong, and can you tweak it so that it is a critique the piece. Okay, so I've tried to frame some geography questions in the form of a critique the piece, but one of them does not belong. So which one of these would you say does not invite students to assess the merits or shortcomings of a person, product, or performance? Okay, great. So a number of you are saying number 3. And I want you to think about, if you were to tweak that, just think for yourself for a moment, how might you tweak that so that it could be a critique the piece? So, and I want you to think about, even when we're, let's say, watching a film with students, what's the task, what's the intellectual task that we've invited students to engage with when we're viewing the film, for example, or if we're reading an article? In what ways are we inviting that kind of intellectual engagement? Okay, we're going to move on now to another type of challenge, judge the better or best. So this is where we're judging from 2 or more options which one meets the identified criteria. So take a look. I'm sorry, I just realized that they're all labeled 1. That should be 1, 2, 3, of course. So if you just want to identify which one, if you can make the second one 2 and the third one 3, which one meets the criteria of judge the better or best. Great. Yeah, so some people are saying number 1. And number 1 does not really invite you to compare between 2 or more options. We're going to look at another example that you might identify as being what number 1 actually is. With number 2, you are trying to decide which is Malala or Stephen Lewis the more impactful global leader. So, and then think about in your grade 8 geography or your grade 9 geography class, this could spark a really interesting discussion, right? It's to set up some really interesting global activists in different ways and ask them, well, which one do you think is making the biggest impact? Okay, another type of question is a decode the puzzle. So here you need to suggest and justify a proposed solution, explanation, or interpretation to a confusing or enigmatic situation. So which of these three would you say is not an example of a decode? Great. So a number of people are saying 2, and I think you're absolutely right, because here we've already analyzed the map, so there isn't an enigmatic situation. Okay. Another type of critical challenge is reworking the piece. I'm glad you like them, Jennifer. So here, you can transform a product or performance in light of additional information or a different focus. Okay, so looking at these, you can ask students to rework the piece. Good. And the number of you, when I was doing these, my numbers were off and I didn't see, you know how it automatically changes the numbers? So I apologize for that. I will have to make sure I change this. Yeah, so number 2, we are not giving an additional focus or additional information. We're just asking for an assessment. So we're doing more of a critique the piece with number 2. Thank you, Ida. Now we've got design to specifications, or design to specs. So here we're going to develop a product that meets a given set of criteria or conditions. Okay, great. Yes, so number 3, we don't have any specifications. We're really doing almost a judge the better or best is implied with the number 3. You guys are great. You're totally getting this. And finally, our last example is perform to specifications. And I like to think of this, perform to specifications, as something that occurs in real time. That's one of the ways that helps me when I'm thinking of the critical challenges I want to set. So here we're performing or undertaking a course of action that meets a given set of criteria or conditions. Okay, so someone says 1, someone says 2. Some other thoughts? Yeah, it's interesting. The number 1 comes up maybe because we think of it as something that really transcends the walls of the classroom, but in a lot of ways we are performing to specifications there, because we're asking someone, we have to first of all think about what is a lasting contribution. So there's some criteria. You know, we can look at, well, how have people made lasting contributions? So how do we make a lasting contribution to someone else's life through an expression of our citizenship? So now we have to really understand citizenship as well. With number 2, yes, they're performing, but there's no criteria there. And that's really important. I can't emphasize enough the importance of the criteria. Critical thinking is actually criteria-based thinking, because it's that criteria that forces, and I use that word about my air quotes here, you can't see me, but it really does force us to make a reasoned judgment. So I could say set goals for the term. In a lot of ways, that's like me saying list goals, and you can just sort of come up with some goals and there may not be a lot of thought to it. Now, personal goals, I would say, is more a description than criteria. So when I'm talking about criteria, I'm talking about things like set impactful goals for the term, or set ethical goals, or set realistic goals for the term. Because now you have to really think about, when you're putting something down, is this realistic? And that's where the thinking, that's where the critical thinking is. It moves us out of the kind of, you know, a bit mindless, like I can just list something, or I need to go in the textbook, find out what the teacher's asking, or this question's asking, straight comprehension. And now I need to really think about it. Okay, so I'll show you, for example, a little later, you can take a task like having students read a passage or read something from the textbook. And you can bump up the thinking by saying, I want you to cross out, let's say you give them a piece of printed text. I want you to cross out the 3 most irrelevant pieces of geographic evidence in this text. Right? Or I want you to highlight the most useful pieces of geographic evidence. And now you've just taken a reading task and you have bumped up the thinking. You have now made that reading task a thinking task. And so that's really what we want to do, is we want to bump up the intellectual engagement and the thinking, and realizing now when we start to recognize that it's those 5 intellectual tools that are always at play when we're thinking, now we can start to be more intentional, to actually nurture thinking. And I think this is what's been a struggle at times for us as teachers, is we want students thinking, and then we feel like we've got all this content that we need to cover, and yet really the goal should be to nurture that thinking. We're thinking through the geography, or we're thinking through the mathematics, because then the learning is really happening at deeper levels. Absolutely. So Jessica, this is a really good point, stretching their brains. We are going to experience resistance from our students when we are inviting this kind of intellectual engagement. We need to be prepared for that and recognize that what that's about are habits of mind. And if we start to explicitly teach habits of mind and use the language of habits of mind. So I've done some sessions in mathematics, and I've said to teachers, I think the 3 most important habits of mind, and this is research my colleague Laura Ginny Newman has done, and seen that the 3 most important habits of mind you need in math are perseverance, open-mindedness, and attention to detail. So those can be a clear focus. Now that you might decide in a particular task or unit in geography that those are also very important. You might decide that really considering multiple perspectives, which is part of geographic thinking, is one of the habits of mind you really want to nurture. So now we have a frame that we can start to be more intentional with this, with our students. Okay, so I just want to take a moment to bring us back, because we're thinking about this. You're jotting some of your own notes in your thought space. So now, hopefully, you might have some different ways of designing your tasks and engaging students in these opportunities to think like a geographer. So using some of these 6 prompts, now you can tweak some of your tasks. And that's what I'd like you to take from this session. Is I'm going to show you some, larger inquiries, but also not to feel like you have to start right away with the big, task if it feels overwhelming, but also to tweak and fortify what you're already doing, and start with that and start playing with that, and do some action research in your own classroom with what happens when I, give them this task. What do I notice? What do I notice about their background knowledge? What do I notice about their ability to use the criteria to make their decision? Right? We can get a lot of really powerful assessment information this way. So going back to this idea of student engagement, let's talk about how we can create an overarching critical challenge in a unit that's an authentic performance task. Okay, so we've got in grade 7, for example, the physical geography, and sometimes a number of teachers said to me, like, it's sometimes a bit dry for students. It would be great if we could teach this outdoors or have them, travel to these places. Now, what's exciting is that things like Google Glasses make it easier for us to do some really neat things around physical geography in our classrooms. But an authentic task is where we're going to get more students to buy in. So it should stimulate life outside of the school and have an audience beyond the teacher in the classroom, and require students to demonstrate their learning through a performance or the creation of a product. So here's some examples of some authentic performance tasks that you might want to think about in geography. Right? So what about if your intermediate students had to design a workshop for a junior class on the importance of tackling climate change? Right? Or again, maybe grade 9, features of an app designed to support the general public in understanding ways to respond to a specific natural disaster. So that could be grade 7 as well. Creatively annotating maps. There's some really cool things you can do with map annotations that are, like, they're very, very, very interesting and invite a lot of thinking. Curate an interactive exhibit that looks at the different global challenges of human settlement and the environment. Or create an effective and compelling environmental action campaign that'll be featured in the local transit system. Right, so these are some ideas of ways we can take geography and transcend the classroom, and again, thinking about citizenship that's also woven into these tasks, right? More meaningful than an exam in a lot of ways, right? Here's a few more ideas. Merging mathematics, the data management with geography is great. Some really exciting things with everything that's happening with data and really neat programs. Like, I don't know if you've heard of Easly, but Easly is a really neat program where students can create their own infographics. So you can do some wonderful interdisciplinary work with mathematics. Now, one of the things I did 2 years ago is had the opportunity to create an inquiry pack. So it took the grade 7A curriculum, and we created an inquiry-based unit. Yes, and you know what, Charlotte? I'm actually going to send a PDF of the key slides that you'll get after the session. So what I did was I was able to create a unit with the consortium, and we created, our authentic task is that students are going to create a compelling message to the world that will incorporate powerful ideas and the most inspiring sustainable responses to environmental change. So we took the strands of the 4 aspects of the environment that are there in that grade 7 physical geography: water, landforms, climate, and vegetation. Students explored that looking at ways we have traditionally responded to natural variations. So how have the Inuit responded to a polar climate, right? How have people traditionally responded to a continental climate? And pulling out the powerful ideas of ways we've interacted. And then in the second line of inquiry, we've looked at what are the most inspiring and sustainable responses to the dramatic changes that are being created by human activity. So then we look at that human activity, but we try to frame it from the hopeful place of how are we responding and what are the most sustainable and inspiring responses. And on the very first day, I give students a thought book, and they write their initial thoughts about their message to the world. So the idea here is that what we often do, and it's an interesting thing about design, because when you sort of realize this, you go, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But what we've often done is we teach students the background knowledge and the content, and then at the end of the unit, we give them an exciting task to think about and apply the learning. But what happens when we leave that to the end is we haven't really given students the time or opportunity to think through that challenge in a meaningful way and have a meaningful structure for their learning, and keep revisiting and changing and developing their thinking and building the evidence. So let's say, we did this unit and they didn't do their message until the end. But when they do it at the beginning and they get to revisit, these powerful brain connections start to happen and the learning is deeper. And I have some real evidence about that, and I'm very excited about what I saw in my classroom, and that's why I'm excited to share it with you. So this is one of my students. This is an actual entry from their thought book on the first day. Okay, so in their thought book, this is their first day. Now, if I was marking them for meeting the key expectations of, the grade 7A unit, and this is what they did, obviously this would be very disappointing, right? There's not a lot of learning that we're seeing here. So, but this is the very first day. Now, what I'm trying to do in the way I'm designing the task is I'm trying to make sure that my tasks are aimed at challenging and transforming my students. Okay, and Carly, I want to make sure I get your comment. After the first session, you had your students write a message. You're so amazed, build off, beautiful. I'm so happy to hear that. Yeah, it's so exciting. So we don't want students just being compliant, right? Or entertained. Yes, getting them to care is great, but when they're challenged and transformed, I think that's at the heart of what we're aiming for as educators. So if we were to rank this on the taxonomy of engagement, I want you to think about where would you sort of rate this student's level of engagement, intellectual engagement? Where might you put this student on the first day? Okay, yeah, cares. Yeah, it's a nice starting point, actually. The student cares. So how am I, through my instruction, here's my question, right? I'm asking myself as I'm reading their messages, okay, how am I going to move them from caring to being empowered? Because that's really my aim. I'm going big. I want them empowered, and I really want to support and nurture that kind of active citizenship and the geographic thinking. So, they do have a thought book where I had them set up separate pages for some of the challenges and opportunities we were going to look at with the natural world, the powerful ideas we would encounter, inspiring sustainable examples, and also their evolving ideas about the audience and format for their learning, right? So there's spaces in the thought book for them to put this. The thought book is not a notebook. It's for the evolving thinking. Right? So here's an example of a student's thought book. Notice the powerful ideas on the left-hand side. So as the classes went on and we talked about powerful ideas that emerged from ways we've traditionally responded, notice all the ideas, and then the highlighting, the student was starting to select using the criteria for which ones were most powerful. And then you notice on the right, she's even started dating different things that she's encountered. So look at this rich, integrative thinking that's being supported here by the design of the unit, right? That's what sometimes we're missing, and I think we're hungry for as teachers, is we want that rich, real thinking and engagement in the discipline. And the thought books, so this is about assessment. Now, I don't use thought books to evaluate. I don't put marks. I might put a Post-it. It's their thought space. I don't want to, I don't want to insert myself in their thought book. But I might put a Post-it and have conversations. And based on their thinking, I have a really good sense of how the student is engaging with the curriculum, right? So the thought book is helping me assess as learning. It's helping assess for learning. And it helps me when I'm trying to triangulate. So when I have a final product and I also have a thought book, I can really look at both and get a sense of how a student has been thinking through. And just really around assessment, I want you to look at the difference between List A and List B. I want you to notice the differences between these two. What would you say is the difference between these two lists? List B calls for decisions. A is specific. When we think about our assessment tasks, one of the things for us to really be aware of as teachers is if we're being clear about the requirements of a task versus the real success criteria of a task. And I think sometimes we conflate the two. And my best example of this is, I realized this as I was, doing some essay writing. And because I was tired of students, not typing things up and, all of those things that are really important, not typing, not having things in paragraphs. And I had these all in the rubric. And yet I didn't have enough of the focus on the thinking. And when it came time to mark and the student hadn't really done the deep thinking, but she was still ending up with, like a level 3 or even a level 4 minus, I knew that something in my assessment was skewed because I was conflating requirements, things now that I say to students, if you haven't done this, it's not done, so you can't hand it in, right? If it doesn't have a title page or whatever it is, it's not in paragraphs, it's not done, versus the thinking that I want to see. So again, we've got some criteria in B. We've got some decision making. We have some thinking. So what does that look like? Really, when we're assessing, how do we know a student knows? How do we know a student has understood the learning? Right? How do we know they've really learned? So when we're thinking about the kind of assessment tasks, we want to provide opportunities where a student is explaining something or teaching it or combining it or questioning it or discovering it or relating it. That's how we know a student has really, really understood. So in geography, when we're assessing these tools of thinking, this is what we're looking for, right? we're looking for students who can draw upon accurate and relevant geographic information. So when we think about that student's first message to the world, there wasn't a lot of geographic evidence, right? So there's not a lot of background knowledge. There's a little bit of background knowledge, but not a lot of background knowledge. Can students make reasoned judgments using relevant criteria? Right? Oh no, so the spatial skills are absolutely part of, like I would say, in part of background knowledge and thinking strategies, right? That's going to be very specific to the geography that you're looking for. Can they competently use key concepts related to geographic thinking? Do they effectively employ useful strategies to work through the task? And do they exhibit the effective geographic thinking dispositions? So I'm going to get to that because that's where we're now, thinking like a geographer thinks. Sorry, just give me actually 1 second. I've gotten to the wrong, went to the wrong slide. There we go. So the key questions of geography, and these are wonderful ways to have students frame different inquiries that they're doing, that they need to answer. You can have a critical inquiry that students are asking, what is where, why there, and why care? And the geographic thinking involves, this is how a geographer thinks. A geographer thinks in terms of patterns and trends, in terms of spatial significance, in terms of the interrelationships, and the geographic perspective, right? So again, when we're creating these opportunities where students are going to use the intellectual tools of critical thinking to think like a geographer, these are the kinds of situations, the kinds of thinking that we want students to be able to do. So when we're trying to assess student thinking in geography, I want you to take a look at these are the overall expectations on the left-hand side for the 7A unit. On the right-hand side, what I've done is try to create look-fors, thinking-based look-fors that take this very general overall expectation, and now this is what I'm looking for in my observations with students, in my conversations with them, and my products. I'm trying to create coherence so that the emphasis in my assessment and evaluation is on student thinking. So I want students not just to analyze, but I want to see evidence that they thoughtfully analyze. I want students to make meaningful connections. Yes, absolutely, Charlotte, you'll get this slide. I want students to demonstrate a critically minded and curious stance when learning about the planet. I want to see that they can effectively collect, organize, and analyze information from primary and secondary sources. I want to know that they can recognize features and implications of different perspectives, that they can formulate and justify conclusions based on appropriate criteria and evidence, that they can effectively communicate their ideas and information, and that they demonstrate a thoughtful understanding of the natural and human-induced changes to physical patterns. So, and this, by the way, there's a neat assessment tool on the TC2 website with the inquiry pack. The launch and the first 2 lessons are free, as well as the synopsis. So you can either just use the synopsis to even structure your own program and at Scaffold. There's an assessment tool that has these look-fors there laid out that you can use. It goes with the unit, but you can also just download that. It's available for free. And then if you did want the unit, there is a cost because it's a whole unit with PowerPoint slides. It has all the background knowledge, all the briefing sheets, all the thinking tools that the students need. So it essentially can replace a textbook, and then you can add and not do certain lessons and add your own, but it's all there. But this is definitely there for you as well. But also taking this, thinking about other geography units, take your overall expectations and create your look-fors, create your thinking look-fors. And I think that will go a long way in helping you and supporting you in really creating this inquiry-based classroom. Because I know that the big issue a lot of teachers face is, I want to do this inquiry. I want to do this inquiry and I'm not able to, I've got to figure out assessment. So in terms of, Byron, I notice you're talking about the spatial skills. So in this sense, I would say that when they're recognizing features and implications of different perspectives, when they're formulating and justifying conclusions, there's certain contexts where they're doing that with regards to spatial skills, but I see your point, and I think it's important that maybe there does need to be something added here that really speaks specifically to that pulls that out and is a little more explicit with it. So thank you for that. I do appreciate your comments on that. Okay, so another, I just want to show you another potential authentic task that I've done. Now, my school context is an arts integrated school, so we're tasked with integrating the arts into our program, so we don't have separate art classes other than music. We're to incorporate dramatic and visual arts. So one of the things I did is had students accurately yet creatively map environmental change caused by human impact to stimulate action on the environment. So create a compelling map that also doubles as an artistic representation highlighting the four most significant challenges and opportunities created by environmental change. So this is an example of one of the students' work. So she took Botswana. There's a great resource, Map as Art. I highly recommend it. If you're into doing a kind of integrated project like this. And you are, the map focuses on, she's got Botswana, and then she is looking at the significant challenges. She's looked at some of the indigenous responses, the ways in which people have traditionally responded and lived in a place, and created this really neat, like she's taken paper, if you can notice that, and essentially rolled paper to create her artistic representation, used different elastics to represent rivers as well, or used some of the different colors to represent rivers. So there's some really, really interesting things in doing that. So the resource is called the Map as Art. Right, and here's another example of the Map as Art, where a student, you can't see all of the writing, but she's essentially annotated the map and done research into the various places. What is there? Why care? Those are the questions that she's been answering through her map. So teachers create the conditions for critical inquiry when they do these things. So when we're not just wanting students to inquire, but we want them to critically inquire, this is what students are doing. framing tasks and questions that problematize the content, involve students in shaping questions that guide their inquiry, giving students more ownership over the directions of their investigations, require that students critically analyze and not merely retrieve information, that they assemble multiple resources that reflect multiple perspectives, accept alternative perspectives and welcome differing perspectives, explicitly teach the tools students need to develop for quality thinking, and shift the focus of assessment from the right answer to the quality of thinking, to well-justified and well-thought-out explanations, and to expert use of the evidence. So using the content of the discipline to inform thinking about everyday issues and actions, and nurturing students to be self-regulated in the use of thinking strategies. So those are the ways in which we can nurture critical inquiry. So we ask students, again, you can show a video of a compelling message. This is another youth environmental activist, and having students assess this. And one of the things you can have them do is assess how much geographic evidence do you see reflected in this talk. And that can be a critique the piece. And students can say, yeah, this message is very, very passionate, and this is a message that you can get online. And the Pioneers, Mally can give you the link to that, and you can watch it. It's a very passionate speech, but it's interesting to get into a conversation with students that, hey, this is actually missing some of the geographic evidence. So Byron, can we include geographic thinking in this task? So can you just clarify? I just want to make sure you bring your voice, because I know you bring a lot of expertise. So in terms of beyond the inclusion of geographic evidence, was there something else that you wanted to add? So I wanted to go back to the student's original message about, this is where they started. And how do you move students to think like a geographer, to be critically thoughtful? So one of the things is, first, I want to show you this task. This is also available in the first lesson that's available to download for free. But I want you to notice how we have some criteria for a powerful idea at the top. And look at, this is what I would call a thinking strategy. So we watched a short video about how the Inuit form their igloos. And we're trying to pull out, what if this is a powerful idea, is a way of interacting with the land and with a place that ends up becoming like a piece of important wisdom, right, that guides thinking because of the sense of place. So there's some different ideas that have been suggested, and then the criteria in the middle column. And notice how the students are having to assess and decide, is this a powerful idea or not? And what's my evidence, right? What's the most powerful idea we can learn from an igloo, right? So this student concluded that C, take advantage of opportunities in your environment, was the most powerful idea. Another student talked about use local materials that can be recycled. For them was the more powerful idea. And what's the evidence? So here is a very scaffolded way of helping students to think critically. And again, just like training wheels, as they become more used to applying criteria, thinking through it, using evidence to support their thinking, you don't always have to rely on an explicit sheet like this, but maybe it will look a little bit different, or maybe students start to internalize the use of criteria. Right? So if the student is trying to create a compelling message to the world about powerful ideas that have shaped traditional responses to a particular place, and as well as the inspiring and sustainable responses to the human impact on the environment, then we want them thinking about that all the way through, right? So again, we want them collecting these ideas, we want them collecting geographic evidence, studying maps, looking at places within their own environments, right? Bringing that sense of a region, of a particular climate zone, of particular vegetation, bodies of water, right, into their thinking and collecting that. And also building the thinking vocabulary, like the difference between evidence and a conclusion, right? So again, a thinking task. What's the difference between which one of these lists is evidence, examples of evidence, and which is a conclusion? And helping students know the difference between evidence or conclusions, right? And then having them draft an initial definition and then providing a definition, and then you could have them revisit. So how close was your definition, or is there something you wanted to add to this definition of evidence or a conclusion? Again, I was talking about how you can bump up a thinking task, highlight the most useful pieces of geographic evidence from the text. And supporting students to know, how do we gather evidence? Well, we gather evidence through research, through observation, through experiments. And what's going to count as geographic evidence for them? So it could be words, it could be photographs, again, of particular places, locations, of different natural processes. Video clips are evidence, maps are evidence, graphs, tables of data, drawings, diagrams. So, okay, so Byron, you're mentioning spatial skills, and I have students looking at maps and graphs in terms of the spatial skills. So when we're talking about evidence, did you want to write tools like GPS? So absolutely. So that would certainly come up when students are examining maps. There's many different things, like you can do the ArcGIS story map. So it's that map activity that I showed, for example, that map project, some students could do that through the story arc, and that's a really powerful tool. So the spatial skills are there. It's just here we're talking about evidence of maps or graphs, and then as they're doing that, as they're working with maps and graphs, we're going to be teaching them the various spatial skills that they need. Analyzing evidence. So, for example, building on their ability to look at a video or look at various text or look at a map and actually be able to identify and pull out the geographic evidence. So this is a great video that's available on Apo Island. It's an Eco-Hope case study, and you can have students watch the video and give them, again, an intellectual purpose for watching it. So view the video and identify examples of geographic evidence that's used to support this conclusion. So there's the conclusion from the video. The islanders care deeply about the future of the fishery because it is theirs, and they now have the knowledge and tools to reap its bounty with confidence. And now they're watching the video and they're having to use find the geographic evidence that actually supports that conclusion. So think about the kind of thinking that's done. Again, looking at geographic facts and evidence. So if the students are preparing something where they need to use geographic evidence, which one of these would make a stronger piece of geographic evidence. So again, we're trying to build their conception of what is strong geographic evidence to support our conclusions. So geographic facts are pieces of information linked to places on the Earth's surface. These facts become geographic evidence when they're used to form or defend a conclusion. So again, I want you thinking about that student's original message and the way that the geographic thinking and the intellectual tools are being nurtured now, right, to push his thinking, right, to push his thinking and his encounters with the curriculum, right. Now he could go back to his message in his thought book, and we're asking revisit. So there's a rework. Now propose 3 pieces of geographic evidence that might support your conclusions that you originally made. Right? So now we're building that capacity to understand the need to support thinking with evidence, with geographic evidence. Right? Another example, when we're looking at sustainable and inspiring responses, which would be the most sustainable response to climate change? So rank the proposed responses from most to least sustainable based on your initial thinking, using this criteria in the corner of effective, realistic, and fair. So now we're thinking through some of the various responses to the dramatic changes caused by. And Charlotte, you used it, and how did it go? You mentioned you used that. How did it go? Yeah, absolutely, Byron. Using the geographic thinking concepts in their explanation. So I had a few graphs actually of different maps and using the geographic thinking of patterns and trends, but ultimately, because of time, I knew I wasn't going to be able to get to that. So, you know, you're absolutely right. Having them talk about geographic perspective, we talk about when we're looking at, we look at the maps that are produced every year where you see the patterns and trends relating to climate change, and students are making reference to that, or the spatial significance of a place, or the impact on a place by dramatic change. What is the spatial significance that's being created? And so that it is very important to continue to have them think about those geographic thinking lenses and to speak that language. So going back now, there was much more that we did in the course of this unit, but I just want to give you a little taste of the way we can scaffold thinking. So we talked about how in the first day we acknowledged that the student cared. Now, I have different, you know, artifacts and evidence, but they did videos. Some of them are up to, you know, like 10 minutes where you see this incredible thinking and a lot of evidence. So I'm not going to show you that, but I did want to show you, I had each student reflect at the end of the unit. And this is a piece of this student's reflection, and I think we can get a bit of a sense of his level of engagement from what he's written here. So if we were to rank this student on the engagement scale in terms of his learning, yeah, so And what was interesting is on the first day, I did a little survey, and I asked students, and I had them put their heads down. I asked them, how many of you feel that you have a role to play, in responding to environmental change? And I would say, in my class of 34, I'd say about 5 students raised their hand. And I asked them the same question at the end of the unit, and every single student raised their hand. Every single student raised their hand. It was a pretty great moment to see that. And again, I really think it's some of the structure of the lesson design, focusing on the geographic thinking, focusing on the quality geographic thinking, that really makes that difference. So I wanted to let you know again that this is available on the TC2 website. So the synopsis of the grade 7 unit, the launch and the first lesson, everything is there. Some of the assessment outline is there as well, so you can tweak that, and change it, and you can change the PowerPoint slides and make them your own. But some of the structure that you can work with, and change according to some of your particular contacts, some of your strengths. There's certain topics and areas that obviously we might have a little more expertise in that we want to make sure we include, or we're in a particular place where there's something we want to talk about the land, where we are, the different environmental patterns and aspects of the environment of where we are. And also, for those of you who are partner boards with us, I did want to let you know that you can register for an account with the Critical Thinking Consortium. You just have to use your work email address. And if you go to our site, you can easily find out if your board is a partner. There's a list. And if you are a partner, use your work email address when you create an account. And you actually have access to a number of different resources and lessons, source documents, some of the intellectual tools. We have 80 lessons, the Competencies toolkit that's there on our website across subject areas, so not just geography, obviously, but these tools that are applicable across subjects, across disciplines, and across grades. So that's there. And I also wanted just to take a moment. I was fortunate enough that there was a filmmaker who was really curious about this whole inquiry-based learning, and he ended up coming because our students in grade 7 did this message to the world. I've also had grade 8 students do a sustainable expo where they've actually designed solutions to some global problems. And I just thought we could take a moment. You'll have to do it in your own browser, but if you take a moment and click on the link, you'll see he just captured footage and he decided to craft the story. So if everyone could just take a moment right now to click on the link and open it in your own browser, and then when you're done, if you can just come back in here and click the yes button so I know that you've seen the video. Okay, thank you so much. I'm getting a sense that maybe people are coming back. Yeah, it was an interesting experience to have this filmmaker come in, and he interviewed the kids and he got all this footage, and he's ultimately the person who put that together. But it really comes back to the point of, I think, that engagement, that we are all we are all aiming for, and the importance of citizenship and the importance of using the disciplinary thinking as well to really further students to be those active and critical and responsible citizens who are looking at their communities, who are looking at their environment, who are connected to the places in which they live, and also thinking globally, you know, and have that sense of place, you know, in order to care for it. And you know, when we design our tasks and we can really focus on that thinking, and when we make that the center and the core of what we're doing, I think it's amazing the things that are possible in our classroom. And you know, there is a great quote when I was in Teachers College. It was Bell Hooks, where she talks about the classroom as this place of possibility. And sometimes, especially right now in the world where things can sometimes feel quite a bit dark, I think it's all the more important that we just continue to create classrooms that are places of possibility for our world. And there's so many exciting possibilities to do that through the geography curriculum. So I hope that this was a useful session for you. And if you do need to be in touch and you want to ask some questions, as I said, I'll create a PDF of some key slides that will be made available to you. But please feel free to reach out and troubleshoot. I'm really happy to do that. And you know, as teachers, we learn from each other in so many ways, and I really want to do whatever I can to support our profession. So thank you for joining us tonight.
So thanks, Maria, for that awesome presentation. I think people have something that they can do when they walk in the classroom tomorrow, and your film was really an inspiring way to end it. I thought that was great. So thank you very much. I just wanted to remind people of a couple of sort of housekeeping things. First of all, if you could please complete the